Good evening. This is Dale Wetzel. This is the Legislature Today radio show. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Gary Emineth, and also some gentlemen from the North Dakota Credit Union industry and the North Dakota Farmers Union. We're going to be speaking about issues important to them in a moment. But first of all, Mr. Emineth, could you please tell us what are the specials tonight at the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck?
Well, tonight is Tuesday night, and on Tuesday night they have Teeny Tuesday, which are martini 2-for-1. So you'll notice everybody down in the bar, most of them have those fancy martini drinks, and they're colored, they're pink, and I noticed there's some blue ones and white and clear. And so anyway, they got about 30 different martinis they
They're celebrating diversity down there.
So they're doing diversity down here tonight.
Okay.
So that's a big deal. So Tuesday night's a busy night with martinis.
We're going to talk a little bit about what happened in the legislature today. There's a couple things I wanted to mention. One of them is there is a kind of an endless journey of a bill that would strengthen drunken driving penalties in North Dakota. Its latest iteration is that it creates a new offense that would come into play if a drunken driver kills or seriously injures someone. This crime is called criminal vehicular homicide. It would be a Class A felony if someone is drunk and then causes an accident and kills someone. It would be a Class A felony, which normally is 20 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. That is the maximum penalty. But the minimum sentence, according to the law as it stands now, would be 3 years in prison. And if it's a second offense, the minimum sentence would be at least 10 years in prison. If the person is driving drunk and has an accident and causes a serious injury, that would be a Class C felony, which is 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. A second offense would be the same, but there would be a minimum sentence of at least 2 years in prison. The first offense, the minimum sentence would be at least 1 year in prison. We also had in the legislature today a bill that is almost all the way through the legislature. It's almost on its way to the governor, which relates to the gentleman I was speaking to you a moment ago about martinis, Gary Emineth. It is something that he is to blame for, if that's what you that's the way you could put it. It is a legislation that says North Dakota will no longer prohibit Election Day campaigning. Now, campaigning in North Dakota used to be, or is, I should say, prohibited on Election Day, and this means that you can't display signs in your yard. You can't go and tell people who to vote for. And Mr. Emineth, who is a former chairman of the North Dakota Republican Party, caused a bit of a stir last fall when he filed a federal lawsuit against the state, saying that this was an infringement on his First Amendment rights as a political activist, and that he didn't want to take down these signs in his yard in Lincoln, North Dakota on Election Day. Well, in any case, a federal judge ruled in his favor and blocked the law from being enforced, and essentially this law was put on, or the enforcement of the law was put on hold, and the lawsuit was put on hold until the legislature met so that we could see whether the legislature did anything about this. Now, this idea of prohibiting Election Day campaigning, it's frankly long been acknowledged to be unconstitutional, but people liked it, and so the legislature refused to repeal it. There have been attempts before to repeal this law or change it substantially, and they have not been successful. This time it looks like they will be successful. There will be still a ban on campaigning on Election Day in North Dakota, but the big difference here is the ban is only in effect within 100 feet of a polling place. If you want to have political signs in your yard on Election Day, you can do that. If you want to broadcast political commercials, you can do that. If you want to tell your friends to vote for candidate X or Y or Z, you can also do that too. And there is another wrinkle to this law, and it says that local governments can't regulate political signs on private property unless they create a safety hazard. I mean, there are several communities in North Dakota that regulate the size and placement of political signs, and we'll see how those local ordinances are affected by this particular law. So Mr. Emineth, you're responsible for this, so what do you have to say for yourself?
Well, I'm glad the legislature finally dealt with something that was unconstitutional. So I think most citizens like not having any campaigning on Election Day, but, the fact of the matter is that, number one, when you work for 2 years to do all your business on a single day, then you have to lock the doors and not allow your customers to come in. I think it's a problem. And so if you really go down to the legislature, when I was party chairman, we would work to get everybody out to vote. Then on Election Day, we couldn't call people and say, please go vote for the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. And you can't support a candidate.
Did you tell them to vote for the Democrat Party?
No, I would not. But as a party chairman, I had to tell them to vote for the Republican. But I could not even do that because I was persuading them to vote for a particular party or candidate. So I think that was just plain old wrong. And in fact, I thought it was kind of funny when it really came out. Everybody was tar and feathered me for wanting to do it. But I noticed I was interchanging with a radio show host in Fargo whose sister happened to be running for the U.S. Senate. And I was texting him on Election Day because I got calls that his sister was out campaigning on Election Day, going door to door. And the bottom line is, when it comes down to it, is a free speech issue, and she was exercising her rights, and I thought it was a great thing she did. Her opponent did not, and it probably cost him some votes on Election Day. But it is a right that is one of the – it's something in North Dakota. We're one of the few states in the country that actually have anything like it. Most people, when you talk to me, they go like, you what? And, so I think a lot of people like the fact that the election's over. We're all burnt out by then. But the reality is that's the day we do all of our business, and you need to be able to not accidentally make a mistake because they're violating every day. There's people who don't always get the signs on. I still see some Ron Paul signs that have been up for like 6 years. So people have been violating those laws. It's just that why don't we just follow the law? So that was really the purpose of it. And I'm glad that legislature acted on it, and they're respecting, with 100 feet of the polling place, that's fine.
So on Election Day, next Election Day, when you don't have to go out and take your yard sign down, you can thank Mr. Gary Emineth for your ability to leave it up.
Or when they're flying around in December, you can be cursing me for the fact that they didn't have to take it down.
This is true. or you could use it. You could use it in the opposite way. You could say, okay, if I see anyone sign up on my way to the polling place, I'm going to vote against them.
That's it. There you go. That'll work.
So that's another way to exercise your right of political free speech. Well, we'd like to turn now to our credit union folks and our North Dakota Farmers Union representative. This is the Legislature today's Credit Union Hour. It's sponsored by the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas, and we have with us here as our guests. We have Mr. Steve Schmitz. He is the president of the First Community Credit Union of Jamestown. We have Richard Schlosser of the North Dakota Farmers Union. He's a lobbyist for the organization in the state capitol, and there's a Farmers Union initiative that deals with credit unions that we're going to be talking about. And we're also going to be speaking to Mr. Paul Brucker, the president of the Railway Credit Union of Bismarck, which serves a number of employees of particular companies that have substantial union employment, including BNSF, CP Rail, the Teamsters, and Century Link. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Dale.
Mr. Schmitz, I understand that the Community Credit Union does quite a bit of ag business. Could you talk about the health of the agricultural economy as you perceive it in North Dakota?
Sure. I think the agriculture economy is probably coming off its best 3 years in the history of agriculture. There's been a number of things that have came together to make it a very good time to be in farming. Number one is the prices are higher than what they have been in the past. And number two is the genetics have been, through NDSU research and South Dakota State and a couple other places that do it, the yields are phenomenal compared to what farmers used to get just 10 and 15 years ago. So the ag economy is extremely healthy. Farmers are coming off record years in across the state. Crops that were not able to be grown in North Dakota very effectively, like corn and soybeans, are now mainstays of the southeastern part of the state. You actually see very little wheat. The three main crops in southeastern North Dakota now are corn, soybeans, and then sugar beets, which you really only saw sugar beets just 10 years ago. Now corn and soybeans are absolutely the two most prominent crops. And it's really changed, but it's changed for the better as far as the financial state of farming.
And what do you attribute this shift in crops to? You mentioned that you don't see much wheat. I mean, why is that?
It's all dollars and cents. Wheat does not dollar out per acre like corn and soybeans do. It's simple math. There's a lot of disease and stuff that comes along with wheat. There's a lot of variables that are not there with corn and soybeans. A good wheat year, maybe 50 bushels to the acre on wheat at $6. You're talking $300 an acre probably gross. With corn, you might be getting 150 bushels to the acre at $6 and or $7 an acre, talking about $800-900 of gross per acre. Now it costs a little bit more to put in corn, but the high side just blows away the low, the things against it. And then soybeans are just a good counter crop. They're relatively stable and don't take a lot of inputs. And they, again, outproduce wheat in the dollars. So that's what's driving the change.
You're listening to Steve Schmitz. He's the president of the First Community Credit Union in Jamestown. Mr. Schmitz, can you tell us a bit about your credit union? Where do you have offices, and how big is it, and how many customers do you have?
Sure. We have about between 30 and 31,000 members. We are located throughout southeastern North Dakota. Our furthest branch to the west is here in Bismarck. We have a couple branches here, and then we also have a branch in the extreme southeast in Hankinson, North Dakota, and then kind of everywhere in between, right along the interstate in Steele, Jamestown, Valley City, Fargo. We go up north a little bit in Portland, North Dakota, and then throughout the Kraut country, as we call it, Napoleon, Wishick. Then we get over into Oaks and Milner and Wahpeton as well.
And what do you need to be in order to join your credit union? Do you need to be a resident of a particular place or work in a particular?
Sure. We are a community charter, which is different than Mr. Brucker over here. He's a SEG charter. We're a community charter, so that means as long as you live in a geographical area, you're eligible to be a member of First Community Credit Union. So we call it field of membership, and it circles out from our credit union a certain number of miles. And basically, if you live within 50 miles of Bismarck, if you live within 50 miles of Wahpeton, if you live within 75 miles of Portland and or 75 miles of Jamestown, and then everywhere in between, you're eligible. So the whole southeastern third of North Dakota is eligible to be a member in First Community Credit Union.
What are your customer trends? Are you gaining? Are you stable? Are you losing?
Well, we would be gaining. We'd be gaining customers overall, but not really very fast. It's a small, probably 2% a year. Where we have seen most of our growth has been the fact of larger customers and more. We've really focused on increasing our relationship with the people we do have, and then we've also focused on in Fargo, where we opened a new branch. We're getting a lot of larger dollar accounts, and but the membership trends, you get across some of the small towns, is relatively stagnant. We're not in the west where they're seeing the population boom. So our areas are pretty well population neutral, but we are definitely growing dollar-wise significantly.
You've been listening to Mr. Steve Schmitz, the president of the First Community Credit Union of Jamestown. We also have with us Mr. Paul Brucker, who is the president of the Railway Credit Union of Bismarck. Mr. Brucker, what sort of customers do you serve?
Our credit union is a little bit different than Steve's credit union. His is a community charter, which is a regional-based credit union charter. Ours is an employment-based charter. So we serve union members. Our primary membership is still with Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Employees and their family members, we serve CP Rail, we serve CenturyLink, Tesoro, and the other union entities here in the Bismarck-Mandan community.
So you need to be a member of a labor union or a member of the family of a labor union member in order to join?
Correct.
How many customers do you have, sir?
About 4,600 members.
And what have your customer trends been? Are you growing?
Yeah, it's been strong. We've been growing 6-7% on the members per year, and our assets. We're a mid-sized credit union where Steve is the largest credit union in the state. We're about $65 million of assets. Our assets are growing strong. Loans are up. The economy is good. Our members are doing well, and so is the credit union.
What sort of business do your members like to do at the credit union? Do they take out home mortgages, car loans, boat loans?
We're primarily a consumer-based entity, so we do all those things you just mentioned. We also do some light and commercial stuff, but the majority of our business is consumer loans, real estate loans, home equities, and that sort of thing.
And how would you describe have you ever thought of expanding your charter or wanted to? Is that an option for you?
It is an option for us, but right now we still have so much untapped potential. We're growing as fast as we want to, and we're doing a good job of serving the members that we do have, so that's the niche we're in, and that's where we plan to stay in for the foreseeable future.
Where are your branches?
We've got one in Mandan, that's our headquarters on Main Street. We've got one on the east end of Bismarck, and we also have a branch in the Burlington Northern Complex in Mandan.
I'm envious of you because your main office is right down the street from the Dairy Queen. I thought that would be a pretty good location.
Real close in walking distance. They deliver, too.
All right. Mr. Schlosser, I understand that the National Farmers Union, first of all, we're going to be speaking to Mr. Richard Schlosser. He is a lobbyist for the North Dakota Farmers Union in Bismarck. He's worked for the Farmers Union for a long time. And I understand that you have some initiatives that are supported by the National Farmers Union about the regulation of rural financial institutions. And I was wondering if you could describe that to us.
Well, during our national convention last month, the convention delegates passed out a special order of business, which is essentially granting some emphasis on public press releases to the press with regards to some immediate issues regarding rural America specifically. And the issue that you reference here is a special order of business asking Congress to grant some exemptions to some of the burdensome regulations that were aimed at the larger banks, those that were too big to fail, that would grant some exemptions to those community financial institutions such as credit unions. And Farmers Union has been a long-time advocate of cooperatives. As a matter of fact, that is essentially one of the philosophical points of our underpinnings of who we are. Development of cooperatives and support for cooperatives, particularly financial cooperatives in the smaller communities where a lot of our members need to attain operating credit, credit for chattel, credit for machinery, credit. As a matter of fact, my first loan I ever made, I was still a senior in college and I wanted to get home to farm. My dad had a dairy. I went to my local credit union and I borrowed money for 10 dairy heifers. So, I mean, this was important. And then, as small as that was then, my son is coming home to farm and I've introduced him to our local credit union, and asking for these exemptions under the provisions that Congress has set forth is basically to facilitate that lending in the rural areas that Steve has talked about.
Could you mention, when we talk about excessive regulations, what are we talking about?
Well, I guess I'm not familiar with the specifics, but I do know that we came out with this special order of business, and that which essentially originated in North Dakota. And North Dakota essentially is sort of I don't know, Steve could probably agree with me or disagree with me, sort of a hotbed of credit union initiatives, and this came out of North Dakota because we saw what was happening and impacting our local credit union.
I would comment really quick on.
I'd like Mr. Schmitz and Mr. Brucker to get into this. Yeah.
The regulation burden that he's talking about is if I could say one word, would be overwhelming for credit unions. The larger you are, the easier you are able to bear that because you have a little bit of economies of scale, but it's absolutely hurting small financial institutions throughout North Dakota, whether it's a community bank or a credit union. And for instance, just on residential house lending, and this is my favorite one, I've talked with Senator Hoeven about a number of times and our new representatives, in that we got 3,056 pages of new residential real estate regulations to put into place in 2013. Now, to read through and digest and then purchase the software and the forms to comply with that regulation is just simply overwhelming. And that's just one of many different ones. They've came out and they've told us how our statements need to appear, and you have to put boxes on your statements, and you have to it's like they think everybody is a crook and every single bank is out there to steal from their membership or their customers, and that's just not the case in small-town North Dakota or probably rural the United States in general. And it just causes us to spend so much more time trying to comply with a regulation rather than doing what we do best, which is lend money to people and do it at an affordable rate.
Mr. Brucker, how do these regulations affect the Railway Credit Union?
Well, I've been in the business over 20 years now. I'm a couple years older than Steve, but I remember when I started, the loans we did for our members, whether it was real estate, whether it was a car loan, a signature loan, you signed 1 or 2 pieces of paper, and it had all the details on there of what you were doing, how you were paying it back, how much it was going to cost you. Now, if anybody's gone and got a home loan in the last few years, you know what I'm talking about now. You don't get 1 or 2 pieces of paper. By the time you're done signing the ream of paper, you really have no idea what you even signed because it's just completely overwhelming the amount of paperwork and disclosures and items that needs to be dealt with. One of our trade association folks in Washington, D.C. came out with an example of how many regulations have been passed in just the last 2 years. And this is also affecting our bank friends as well. But the example they give me, if you started stacking up these pieces of paper on the floor, on your left-hand side, the paper would go all the way up to your head, and you turn to your right-hand side, and you get another stack of paper equally as high. And all these are brand-new laws and regulations that we're forced to comply with. And like Steve alluded to, he's got a little better gig on that because he's a bigger institution, but the smaller you get, the more burdensome it is. And now we got credit unions that are small in size of a few $1 million of business, and they're expected to comply with the same pile of regulations, and it's just overwhelming for them.
How do you have to hire folks to deal with this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And the people that you do have are taking on additional roles, but we've had to hire, I would say, between 2 or 3 people, and it's a little bit convoluted because that's not necessarily their only job at the credit union, but I would say between 2 to 3 FTEs, full-time equivalents, at our credit union just to comply. That doesn't count hiring consultants for residential lending to find out some of the different laws, how to comply with them. And these big mortgage lenders do not like to lend in small town North Dakota. They do not like to do loans in Napoleon and Wishick, Steele, because there's no comparables.
We'll get back to that subject after our break. We've been listening to Steve Schmitz. He's the president of the Community Credit Union of Jamestown. Also, we have Paul Brucker, the president of the Railway Credit Union of Bismarck and Mandan, and Mr. Richard Schlosser, a lobbyist for the North Dakota Farmers Union. We'll be back in a moment. This is Dale Wetzel. This is the Legislature Today radio show. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. This is the hour that's sponsored by the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas, and we have with us a group of folks to talk about credit union and agricultural issues. We have Mr. Paul Brucker, the president of the Railway Credit Union of Bismarck and Mandan. We have Mr. Steve Schmitz, president of the Community Credit Union, which is based in Jamestown and covers southeastern North Dakota. We also have Mr. Richard Schlosser, who is a lobbyist for the North Dakota Farmers Union and a full-time farmer himself. Mr. Schmitz, before we went to break, we were talking about the effect of regulations on rural credit unions, the new regulations, and how you have to hire folks to deal with this stuff. I mean, these regulations, what do they do? I mean, what are they designed to accomplish?
Well, I think the government's intent, which is generally good in heart, but not very good, or good in theory, is not very good in practice. And their intent is to protect consumers. And they've even named the financial or Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is one of the main regulators for this. The problem is that in thinking their idea of protecting the consumer is, as Paul alluded to, more and more paperwork that consumers simply don't have the time to read. He alluded to closing a house loan, and right now there's a lot of home loans being closed in North Dakota due to the oil boom, etc. And a lot of these closing agents, you get about 30 minutes to close a house loan, and there's about 70 sheets of paper. Now, you better be a darn good speed reader to read 70 sheets of paper, know what you're signing in those 30 minutes, because that's all you got. And your choice is to sign and get your loan in those 30 minutes or to leave and do it another day. And so most people just sign, not even knowing what they're signing. So their heart is in the right place, but in practice, they're just overwhelming consumers with more and more and more sheets of paper. What used to be 2 is now 10. What used to be 10 is now 50.
So, Mr. Brucker and Mr. Schmitz, what do we do about this?
That's a good question. Somehow we have to get the message back up through the legal channels, that we have to get back to the voice of reason. And like Steve alluded to, I do think the intent on this was good when it started, and somebody had a concept to protect people. But what ends up happening is all these new laws and all these new regulations come out, and they're affecting people that weren't cheating people to start with. Mm-hmm. Like I said, back when I started, interest was interest and payments were payments, and this is what the loan's going to cost you, and that's still the same today. But in addition to that, you're going to get another 25 sheets of paper that you need to try to digest and reason through and figure out in a short period of time and sign. And really, we could get back to being real simple and doing things the easy way.
How much longer does it take you two gentlemen to make a mortgage loan than it did, say, 5 years ago?
Well, if you talk to our mortgage lending department, that could be anywhere. A typical loan maybe could have been done in 3 weeks back in the early 2000s, and it probably 60 to 90 days now.
If you can get an appraisal.
If you can get an appraisal. And now there's some ludicrous deals where they're asking you to get 2 appraisals on the same home just to make sure that the first appraisal is correct. But
and as I understand it, the appraisers can't know each other either or be affiliated with each other.
Yeah, there's all sorts of concerns there. And there was some fraud in appraisers in Minneapolis and in Las Vegas. But that didn't come into North Dakota, but we're we're the baby being thrown out with the bathwater, so to speak, and we're getting hit with all the sins that were committed outside of our state, outside of small banks and credit unions to start with. Even in Las Vegas, a lot of those credit unions or banks, the smaller banks, were not the ones involved in doing this type of lending. So it's really become a major, major issue. And the one key here is, I think, all those sheets of paper don't come without a cost. And in business, whether it's a credit union or a bank or wherever, costs are passed on to the consumer. So that's really where this is going to impact consumers is, A, the ability to get a loan, a house loan in a small town is very difficult just to get one right now. But B, every single loan you get is going to cost more, period, to end, because our costs are going up. And if our costs go up, we have to pass it on.
How is this increased cost reflected? Do you have a higher interest rate, or do you have more fees, or how is it?
Well, it depends how it works. Steve had a good example before. How about the poor individual that has to go out and get 2 appraisals so they can get their loan? Well, in Bismarck, Mandan, appraisal is somewhere between $500 and $600 now, and the member has to pay that. So now, if you're forced to go out to get an appraisal to confirm the first appraisal is right, add another $500 or $600 on there. That all comes right out of the pocket of the consumer.
And we've tried to continue to hold our costs down, and it's very difficult to say where it's going to be. You're constantly looking at your balance of how much interest you're paying, how much interest you're charging, and then and then you're trying to make a profit. So you make tweaks along the way. It's not like you're coming out and saying, well, we're going to have to go and charge triple here. But the costs, like Paul is talking about with appraisals, that's a real hard cost, and consumers are paying that right from the start. And in 2002, when I moved to Jamestown, my appraisal cost $225. Today, that same appraisal would easily be $600. Just 12 years. Now, inflation, they say, is neutral. So why has an appraisal went from $225 to $600? And then if you need 2, it's $1,200.
And we can carry that forward to the other costs as well. It used to be you could get a mortgage and your total cost were under $1,000. Now I've seen instances where the costs are $2,000, $3,000, or even $4,000 to get a mortgage. That's just crazy.
Why are appraisals more expensive? So much more expensive?
Because they can.
Well, they can,
it's market driven.
Okay. Well, they've got more regulations as well. They've got to do more tests. They got to have a bigger database. They have to confirm their values. They got to get extra testing and insurance, and all that stuff adds up.
One of the other issues, too, was getting comps and comparable prices. And that was the issue coming into the legislative session. Our members said this was an issue, the delay in appraisals. And legislatively, we looked at things, what can we do? to help the appraisers out. And there was a bill that actually that has passed both chambers now. It's waiting to get signed, HB 1225, and it's called the Sales Price Disclosure Bill. Basically, what it does now is make everything public. You have a transaction, you sell your house, it's now public. And where we were having issues with that is in the rural areas, where before it was really kind of an opt-in. I don't want the sale of my price of my home to be public. And so these appraisers had to go knocking on doors and tracking down the seller and the buyer. What was the value of that house? What's it being sold for? So they could do a comparable appraisal on it. And that really delayed the process. So with the passage of this bill, it should speed up the process. And it also includes agricultural sales, and it also includes commercial sales. Ag land, I think, anything under 80 acres is exempt from that, but big sales will be included in that.
Mr. Schmitz, you were talking earlier about the significance of agricultural business to your institution. Could you elaborate on that a bit, please? I mean, what percentage of your business is, say, farmland loans or farm equipment or agricultural related?
Well, farm lending is the backbone of First Community Credit Union, and that is what we were chartered to do back in 1939. We do a lot of other loans. We basically do every loan type under the book, but our bread and butter is agricultural loans. Right now, we are 50% of our portfolio is made up of agricultural loans. That would be ag real estate, ag operating lines for planting and fertilizer, chemicals, etc., and then also the chattel lines, which would be for your equipment and or cattle and other inventory type things. And it's simply in our part of the world, ag is still the boss. Oil has not impacted us that much, and ag is our bread and butter.
And what sort of equipment are people buying?
Oh, it's, I said there's probably been the 3 best years in agriculture. They're buying anything and everything, but bigger, better, newer combines, would be the big deal out there. Again, combines back in the 80s, early 80s, costing $20,000, $30,000, now costing $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. Headers costing $150,000, etc. So a lot of that, a lot of seeding equipment. GPS is huge now. Farming has gone scientific. Auto steers and the GPS equipment to turn your spray nozzles on and off, so you're not double hitting the same weed, and you're becoming more efficient. All that stuff costs money, and farmers, when they have good years, they spend money, which is great for our economy.
Is there a great demand for irrigation equipment in your region?
That varies. Like down in the Oaks area, there's quite a bit of irrigation going on. If you get out into the Steele area, Dawson, there's quite a bit of potato land out there, and they're irrigating that. Then there's other parts of our field of membership that really have very little irrigation at all. We're doing some tiling loans out in eastern North Dakota to get rid of some of the water, so to speak, so it drains better. That is another new type of loan, and it's a little, different lending on loans to drain water away, but we've been doing that as well.
Hey, Dale, could you give me a little help here, and maybe Richard and Steve could allude to the price of land and where they see that going? Is there a little tied a little closer to that than I am?
All right. Mr. Schlosser, you're a working farmer. Tell us, where are agricultural land prices going?
Dale, quite frankly, it's scary. Particularly, Steve is reaching for the ceiling here. We can't see that, but I guess we as farmers worry, particularly those of us that are involved in farm organizations, really worry about the day the bubble bursts. And I would imagine financial institutions, credit unions, farm credit, all those people are concerned about that, where it's going to go. Personally, we are sort of going through a transition right now. I'm heading towards retirement. My son is coming home to farm, and we're going through a lot of this. And thanks to our local credit union, again, we're able to engage the process of transfer of our assets, my wife's and mine, to my son. And I think this is one of the great legacies in agriculture is when your son comes home to farm. I mean, it's a good feeling. So,
like 20 years ago, would that be something that you could have envisioned happening, your son coming home to farm? And would it have been something you would have advised him to do?
Well, it's like I tell everyone else. I've farmed for 40 years, and 35 of those were break even. The last 5, as Steve says, have been really good, phenomenal. And not only because of commodity prices, but because of cropping changes that we've experienced in southeast North Dakota. And I think without our lenders, credit unions, I would have had a difficult time.
Tell us a bit about your operation. Where is it? How large? And what do you produce?
I farm in Lemoore County, south of Jamestown. We raise basically we're down to 2 crops. The last 5-6 years, we've transitioned from barley, wheat, corn, soybeans to corn and soybeans. And we are out of the cattle business. It just seemed to be financially more advantageous to basically grow corn and soybeans.
Do you see yourself continuing to do that for the foreseeable future, as sticking with corn and soybeans?
Yes, and for the foreseeable future. And as Steve said, we've experienced some really good years. And until last week, we saw some really good prices in corn, but with some of the USDA stocks report, we saw a significant drop in both those crops in price. But again, to weather the vagaries of the market and weather through good insurance programs and financial backing of local financial institutions, we've weathered those storms.
Tell us why the National Farmers Union and the North Dakota Farmers Union are interested in bank regulation.
Well, I think essentially is, as Steve had pointed out and Paul, the burdensome regulation that we saw here was, crafted not in North Dakota, but somewhere else where one size fits all. And, the regulation has created some burden for those financial institutions, which we need in terms of accessing credit. And whether it's an operating loan or buying the machinery that Steve talked about, and my son is interested in this. Of course, he's a little more technologically advanced, and that is probably more costly than in my day when I turned the steering wheel. He wants to do things differently, but they understand. They understand my place. My loan officer comes out to my place, visits me once a year. We have one day our local credit union brings lunch out to our farm, and I think that personal relationship that we so enjoy, and I think that hand-in-hand relationship is really a good example of how you need to develop this relationship with that support group, our access to credit, credit unions.
In your opinion, is it appropriate to regulate credit unions as the same as banks when you have credit unions which are essentially member-owned, and if you're being predatory, you're being predatory on your own ownership? Is it right in your opinion, or does it make sense to regulate credit unions the same way as you regulate banks?
Well, I have a personal opinion on that because having been involved with co-ops pretty much all my life and been on a co-op board, those directors on that co-op essentially are a set of regulators. I mean, that co-op manager, when they deal with that board on a monthly basis, he's probably dealing with some pretty stringent regulations from those 5 or 6 or 7 or 9 directors who are affected by what is done in that credit union or that co-op.
Well, one of the things about this resolution, the national resolution now that the Farmers Union is doing, it actually started in North Dakota. Dan Wagner, the CEO of the Lisbon Farmers Union Credit Union, went to the state Farmers Union and said, you know what, here's some of the issues that my credit union is facing. It's the issues that credit unions are facing across the state. Can we, as a group, get a resolution and take it national to see if we can do something with Congress about, releasing some of the burdens on credit unions? So it actually has the origins in North Dakota from Lisbon, and is now all the way, it's gone up the chain and is in Washington, D.C., and it's part of the National Farmers Union resolutions, legislative resolutions.
Mr. Schlosser, how much effect do you think this will have? When I say this, I mean this resolution that says, please, take this yoke off of our shoulders.
Well, I hope a lot. Roger Johnson was going to call in our National Farmers Union president, familiar to a lot of North Dakotans, former ag commissioner here. And he was going to call in tonight because of some technological issues. Couldn't.
We'll have him in the fuure.
You'll have to get him on.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good question to pose for him to see how effective he is in getting this done. So, but I honestly feel, with the influence that we have there, with the offices that we have there, with Roger as our president leading the charge on that lobbying effort, and then working with the credit unions, I think we can get this done.
Mr. Schmitz and Mr. Brucker, I'm trying to think of how to ask this, but are you afraid that this is all going to end soon?
What's going to end?
This prosperity that we have.
Well,
I mean, is that a concern of yours? Because see, when I came to North Dakota, it was in the mid '80s, and there was drought and low prices for oil, low prices for crops. The state budget was in the toilet, and now it seems like I've taken acid or something, and everything is completely different, and it's hard to grasp. And I'm more used to misery, I guess, but I'm interested in what you think about. I mean, when you're obviously everyone is embracing the fact that we have a thriving economy and that ag prices are good, but at the same time, is it in the back of everyone's mind that it can all go to, where in the matter of
what's your
number of
crystal
months?
ball?
Well,
that is an issue,
and I don't think there is a crystal ball, but everything runs in cycles, and I think we are running our business like we are on the high end of a cycle, meaning that we are looking at the downside. If the upside is there and it gets better than what we anticipate, that's easy to deal with. But what is tough to deal with is when it's, when things turn. And I think Paul would agree with me, when our examiners, when the people who come in, and right now at First Community, we currently are having we have the federal examiners in and the state examiners in, and they're telling us if we can continue to do business. And they very much so are interested if we are able to handle the downside, because they are the eternal pessimists. They come in and tell you everything that could go wrong. And of course, when you talk with farmers, and right now things are so good, we're all talking about being eternal optimists, but you need to be able to handle yourself with the potential that things aren't going to be that good, because I can guarantee you at a certain point in the future we're going to go through tough times again. What it is, what happens, I don't know.
And this is an issue our credit union and our officers take very seriously and look at as well. We like to follow one golden rule, and this applies in my mind to land, to stocks, to commodities, to whatever you're talking about, baseball cards for that matter. And nothing goes one way forever. And we've been on a good run. But that being said, does it appear that this is going to turn around and go south in the next short period of time? It sure doesn't. Business is creating business, and everything is strong. Some of the land prices we're seeing on some of the older houses in, say, in Old Mandan, where they've doubled in the last few years, is that a bit too much? It could be. But the demand is there, and it looks like it's going to stay strong for the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Mr. Brucker, you threw out a piece of bait there, and I'm going to take it. You mentioned baseball cards. Is there a reason why you mentioned baseball cards?
I should have sold the ones I had long, long ago.
I was wondering if anyone here is a baseball card collector. We can get into a discussion of baseball cards. What is the legislature doing? I wanted to ask you the question of you three gentlemen. What is the legislature doing to help you? Is there anything that you've asked them to do to help you that they and what has their reception been to that?
A lot of our business is driven by the federal law.
Yeah, and I would just echo that. I mean, the state has been very receptive. Our own federal representatives, whether Senator Hoeven, Senator Heitkamp, and losing my
Congressman Kramer.
Congressman Kramer. I'm
he
sorry.
He is a new guy.
The new guy.
They have been very receptive, but the problem is there's very little that can be done at a state level. They've helped us with the appraiser thing. That is great. If there's other things that they can help with, that's going to be great. But the rules that we're being required that are really hurting us are federal driven. One
of the things I wanted to inject in this, and I should have brought it up earlier, but Senator Heitkamp is a member of the banking committee.
Yes.
And how are you going to be able to leverage this in terms of accomplishing what you want in terms of regulatory relief, do you think?
Oh, it's fantastic having our senator, the freshman senator, being a member of this committee. And also it helps having Senator Johnson from South Dakota as the chair of that committee. So as our member trade association members, we do cover South Dakota as well. We have a pretty good say, or we have pretty good access to the leaders in that are making the rules and doing the oversight in the financial services industry. So with Senator Johnson, Senator Heitkamp has been extremely receptive to some of our issues. She's a credit union member. Her mother-in-law was a board member of Steve's Credit Union, and she knows our issues firsthand and foremost.
Mr. Schlosser, how do you think that's going to play out with Senator Heitkamp on the banking committee?
Well, obviously, growing up in southeast North Dakota, a small community, understanding co-ops, understanding credit unions, ag lending, and serving as Attorney General in North Dakota, dealing with some of those issues. I think she has a good resume.
Gentlemen, have you had good access to her or her staff?
We've
so far.
Yeah, we've been out there one time here at the end of February. We had good visits with all three of our congressmen. Actually, we've had excellent access to all three of ours in North Dakota, and my understanding is the three in South Dakota have been equally accessible. And I think the Upper Midwest isn't the problem here. It's the coast that are really driving some of this. Agree.
We've been speaking to Mr. Steve Schmitz, who's the gentleman whose voice you just heard. He is the president of the Community Credit Union of Jamestown, which covers southeastern North Dakota and comes all the way west of Bismarck. We also have been speaking to Mr. Paul Brucker, the president of the Railway Credit Union of Bismarck and Mandan, and Mr. Richard Schlosser, who farms in Lemoore County, and he is a lobbyist for the North Dakota Farmers Union. And this has been the Credit Union Hour on the Legislature today. We're sponsored by the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas, and we also have with us, I should mention, Mr. Jeff Olson, the Vice President for Advocacy and Awareness for the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. And we will see you tomorrow night on another subject of the Legislature.